Committee. I'm happy to welcome you to the March session of the 2017-2018 Lunch and Learn series. My name is Nina Singh, and I'm the 2012 recipient of the Pat Griffin Scholar Award. This prestigious award is given to nursing scholars who have demonstrated an exceptional commitment to nursing research. I encourage you to nominate a colleague, as nominations for the 2018 Pat Griffin Scholar Award are now open. So please visit the CASN.ca website for more details. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of lunch and learn, where faculty members come together during their lunch hour to share with one or another the projects they are working on, and to dialogue and discuss methodologies, successes, and challenges they have encountered in their work. This webinar series is intended to serve as inspiration and as a networking opportunity for participants while creating a collegial feel of the lunch and learn. In this fifth session of the 2017-2018 series, we will hear from Dr. Rosemary Rosen, Associate Professor at the School of Nursing at Queen's University and nurse practitioner in chronic pain at Kingston Health Sciences Center. Rosemary has been a nurse for 25 years and a nurse practitioner since 2000. She is also the Deputy Director of Practice for the Queen's Collaboration for Healthcare Quality. The work that she has done with this group, in particular, has focused on the generation of knowledge, synthesis, and translation for practice. During today's webinar, Rosemary will be providing us with an overview of systematic review approach, including the different types and key steps in undertaking one, as well as some examples of her work. After Rosemary's presentation, we will have time for questions. To submit a question, please use the question and answer function on your screen. Once you have finished typing your question, please don't forget to hit send. I will now turn the session over to Rosemary so we can begin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining you from sunny Lenham in Kent in the UK, where I am on sabbatical right now. And it is looking very much like spring here, so I hope it is in Canada too, because I will be back tomorrow. I'm really passionate about this topic, and as Mina mentioned, I'm part of the Queen's Joanna Briggs collaboration, or the Queen's Collaboration for Healthcare Quality, as we're now known. And this is a very interesting group of faculty members from Queen's, including Christina Godfrey, Amanda Ross-White, our library scientist, and Kimberly Sears, and Professor Emeritus Dr. Margaret Harrison. And we're a small but mighty little team, so we do quite a lot of systematic review projects. So I put a few of my some of the projects that I'm working on right now that are in varying stages of doneness, and just one publication that we've just recently submitted. So as Mina mentioned, I'm going to review a little bit about systematic reviews. We'll tell you a little bit about some of the reviews that we're working on right now. And then I'm also going to jump into some other uses of review methodology, because if any of you have taken a systematic review course, it's one of those things, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So I find the systematic review methodology and parts of it to be quite practical in other areas of both practice and research. Okay, so the Joanna Briggs Institute I need to tell you a little bit about, because it really is very, very much embedded in the way that I look at systematic reviews and the way I've been taught to do systematic reviews. So the Joanna Briggs Institute was founded quite some time ago and the original founder is Alan Pearson from the University of Adelaide in Australia. So he talks about the purpose of the Joanna Briggs Institute is to get the information into the hands of those who determine policy and deliver healthcare, and really to put all of that evidence together in systematic review is what the Joanna Briggs Institute forwards. The Joanna Briggs collaboration, I've just included the Americas here on the slide, but there are over 50 centers across the world of Joanna Briggs collaboration, so across in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, in Australia, and in Africa. Many have different purposes, but all work together, and we meet every year at a colloquium and share our resources. So just a quick word about the Joanna Briggs collaboration. And for our part at Queen's, our purpose is to build a vibrant, sustainable pan-Canadian community. So we're really all about evidence generation and evidence use for patient care quality and healthcare quality. And we now have a number of other centers across Canada as well, which we're very excited about. So we started off at Queen's, and now there's centers in Halifax at the University of New Brunswick and in University of Victoria as well. So the Joanna Briggs Institute uses something called the FAME approach, and I want you to think about FAME when you're thinking about systematic review, because systematic review is all about determining the feasibility, so that's the F, and which speaks to the degree of which an activity is practical or practicable, and whether or not it's feasible in a clinical setting. And A is appropriate. So it's the extent to which that intervention or activity fits within a particular situation. And so it talks about context as well. So is it appropriate to the context in which you wish to deliver it? M is meaningful. So is it meaningful to patients? Is the activity meaningful to those who will be receiving it, or the intervention meaningful to those who are receiving it? So it may also relate to personal experience, their opinions, values, thoughts, beliefs, interpretations as well. And it may also give us some information as to whether or not patients are likely to be positively or negatively impacted by a practice, and whether or not they'll be accepted in the practice environment. And E refers to effectiveness. So this makes really good sense. Effectiveness is to the extent to which an intervention, when it's used properly or appropriately, achieves the intended effect. So why systematic review? Well, we know there's an explosion of knowledge out there right now. There are so many papers and so many different topics, and it's really impossible for an individual clinician or a policymaker to really look at absolutely everything on a particular topic or looking at a particular intervention. And so systematic review really gives us an opportunity to put all of this together and synthesize the results into a form of evidence that's going to inform practice and policy. So I found this, I think it's kind of funny, you know, we have long since passed the time when randomized controlled trials were at the top of the evidence pyramid. So systematic review, meta-analysis is now at the top of the evidence synthesis, of evidence pyramid, and I just know really has dropped off. I think we're long past the time when we use N of 1 trials to, or N of 1 experiences to determine what we do in practice and what policies we make. And I hope you all agree with this. Well, I suppose I'm preaching to the converted because you've taken time out of your busy day to listen to this talk. So systematic review is a form of using research as secondary data. So the process to do a systematic review, therefore, must be very rigorous. And it's as rigorous as a primary research study. So we really need to minimize arbitrariness, and really do a methodologic approach to doing the review. So we need to reduce the impact of personal or ideas and opinion or unsupported judgments on the outcome and the conclusion reached. So what's the difference between a systematic review and a literature review? Well, literature reviews, the choices can be subjective, and we've all done literature reviews in our time. I certainly have. And when I go back and look at my literature reviews now that I've done systematic review, I feel like I have not followed the steps and been as rigorous as I could be. So in comparison, systematic review is formed by a pre-established or a priori protocol that you write up in advance. Literature reviews don't usually have a stated methodology or a stated series of steps that you're going to follow. And by contrast, again, systematic reviews follow the structured research process. There's in literature reviews, there's a risk of bias and the risk of systematic error. And in the systematic review, we take steps to reduce the risk of bias. There's limited searching in a literature review. So you may search until you've got all the information you think you need in order to support what it is that you're going to do or the conclusions that you're going to make. But by contrast, systematic review is systematic and exhaustive searching. And I put a little point in here now about the importance of a library scientist. Doing an exhaustive literature review is quite difficult, and I know all of you have done one at one point or another, and it can be quite complex, particularly with the large number of literature databases that currently exist, especially if you're doing searches of gray literature, so unpublished literature or literature that's available on the World Wide Web. And there's aspects of the search in systematic review that include something called reference chasing, where you look at the references in a paper and follow them up, or call the authors and say, do you have any other papers on this topic? So that searching in a systematic review is really very exhaustive and very rigorous. In a literature review, because you don't have a stated methodology and you may be doing limited or potentially biased searching, it's not reproducible by somebody else. And the methods are not transparent, whereas obviously in systematic review, they're reproducible and transparent. So literature review has its place if you're looking for a very small amount of information, but you're certainly not going to get the information that you get with systematic review, and you're also exposing yourself to the risk of bias. So quickly, systematic reviews are a protocol-driven process. You set your objectives ahead of time. You define your eligibility criteria for the studies. And this is where, if you're doing a systematic review, you really do need to have a topic expert, because that person that has that topic expert is able to help you define the edges around what studies you're going to include and which ones you're not going to include. I can't state that. It's so important. And if you're using a methodology like that provided by the Joanna Briggs Institute, you need to define in advance what score you're going to give the accepted articles, and which aspects of the questions for critique for eligibility you're going to include. It's very explicit, it's reproducible. The search, as I mentioned, is exhaustive, and we do an assessment of the validity of the findings. So there's a critical appraisal of each, and then they're included and in the synthesis, and everything is included in the final document. So there are quite a few sets of standards available now for doing systematic review. And the quality of a systematic review really depends on the extent to which methods are followed. So I would encourage any of you, when you pull a systematic review in a literature search that you're doing, is have a look at the quality of their reporting, and ensure when you're going to use a systematic review that there are methods that you feel are reliable and valid and meet the standards. So there are lots of reporting standards for reports that systematic reviews should follow. So there's PRISMA, there's NTREC, there's the Joanna Briggs Reviewer's Manual, which is available from joannabriggs.org, and the JBI Systematic Review Author Guidelines, and as well as the Cochrane Collaboration and the MECIR, Methodologic Expectations of Cochrane Intervention Review. So all of these organizations and documents set out the standards for what a systematic review that is published would include. So there are many different types of systematic review. So in the past, we really have focused on reviews of randomized control trials of therapeutic interventions for effectiveness. But now there's really been a shift, I think, to consider other types of evidence, such as qualitative evidence. Lynn's having some trouble with the sound. Is everybody else okay? I'm going to continue on until I hear otherwise. The shift towards qualitative evidence is I think really important. It's been a bit controversial, but I think now we're heading in the right direction with some very interesting documents that have been recently published on the topic. So the methodologies and methods are constantly evolving. And the Joanna Briggs Institute, for one, has developed methods for over 10 types of systematic reviews. And they are, in no particular order, all of these. So I'm not going to read them out. The ones that we have done before, if we have done effectiveness reviews, we've done qualitative reviews, we have done umbrella reviews, and we have done scoping reviews within our Queen's Joanna Briggs collaboration. If you want to know any more of any of these different types of reviews, we'll talk about a few of them, but I would encourage you to have a look at the Joanna Briggs site or the Cochrane site and get some more information about those. So with each systematic review, there's a number of different acronyms for helping you to develop a question, because like with any other research study, systematic review really does start with a question. So we probably, everybody knows most commonly, PICO is used for effectiveness reviews, and PEAK small o, as I call it, is for qualitative reviews, but we make fun of this. It's a lot of different acronyms. So COCOPOP for prevalence and incidence, PERD for diagnostic tests, PAO and PCC for scoping reviews. It's very interesting that we've developed all these different mnemonics, but the point is, it really is important to have a solid question and a solid inclusion-exclusion criteria. So here are the steps. So you formulate your review question, and your review question comes, of course, from your scoping of the literature. And I'll take a little side step here and talk about scoping the literature prior to systematic review. One of the important things that you have to do before you start a systematic review is make sure nobody else has done it. And scoping the literature is almost as rigorous a process as the systematic review itself. So you have to really look through the entirety of the literature to ensure that first of all, there's a need for this systematic review, and secondly, it hasn't been done by someone else. So one of the places that I like to start is a website called Epistemonikos, and it's in a slide coming up, so you don't need to scramble to write it down. But Epistemonikos, for my money, gives me the quickest way to discover whether or not a systematic review on the topic has been done. And it's a very nimble database. So we formulate we've done our scoping, we determine it's an appropriate thing to do, nobody else has done it. We're going to formulate the review question and define our inclusion and exclusion criteria here. And this is so important that we have the topic expert with us when we do this. You have to find the studies, select the ones that you want. So oftentimes you do a text and title and abstract review, and you move things down to a smaller number. Then you have to do a full text review. And from there you move things down to a smaller number. Then you have your final number of full texts that you're going to look at. You have to assess their study quality and determine whether or not they meet your criteria for inclusion based on the quality of the study. Then you start extracting the data. You do your analysis and your summary and synthesis of the studies. You present the results and you interpret the results. And it's very important also to determine the applicability, so the typical implications for policy, practice, and research. So meta-analysis is, if it's possible, is often a component of a systematic review. So oftentimes when you look at literature, and you'll see that a review might be called a meta-analysis. So it's a systematic review that includes meta-analysis. So meta-analysis is only appropriate for quantitative evidence, so questions of effectiveness, feasibility, and appropriateness, but not meaningfulness. This is where you pool data using a statistical method to combine the results. So we have a number of studies with a smaller number of participants, and we pool the data to give you so that you can make a comment based on a larger sample size. It's quite a precise calculation of an estimate of a treatment effect. You usually get a forest plot that tells you whether something else favors intervention or favors control. And once again, it only forms part of the systematic review in which it appears. Metasynthesis then is something that happens with qualitative evidence. So this is probably relatively new to some people. So a metasynthesis is when we take qualitative evidence and synthesize it together, and it answers questions of meaningfulness, feasibility, and appropriateness, but not effectiveness. See the difference? So qualitative analysis of a number of different qualitative research studies and text is what's included in a metasynthesis. It uses qualitative methods of combining the studies, and it only forms part of the systematic review in which it appears. So a systematic review of qualitative or quantitative evidence is going to include, the qualitative is going to include a metasynthesis, the quantitative will include the meta-analysis, and then there's going to be narrative synthesis as well alongside. So those meta types of syntheses only form part of the review. Lastly, or not quite lastly, there's a mixed method review. So where you have both quantitative and qualitative findings to address multiple forms of evidence. So this is essentially two different types of reviews put together. So you're going to be answering questions regarding feasibility, appropriateness, meaningfulness, and effectiveness all in one. So recently, the Joanna Briggs has added umbrella reviews. So I know when you look at the literature, it's overwhelming, the number of different types of reviews that are out there. So this is a review of a review. So an umbrella review takes together all the existing systematic reviews on a particular topic and does a review of the reviews. So again, with the same purpose, to bring together all the different types of evidence, all the different reviews on a particular topic, and say something meaningful about all of them for the same purpose. It's very difficult for clinicians and policymakers and educators and those looking at the literature to look at every single article or every single review and make a comment. So there are umbrella reviews out there. I've never done one. It's a little daunting to me, but I suspect there may be somebody in the audience who has tackled one of these, and if you have, good for you. So here's some examples. So here's one we're just finishing up. This is a scoping review. And a scoping review looks at everything that's available in the environment in terms of literature. If you set your inclusion criteria to include gray literature, as we did in this scoping review, so you're collecting all of the evidence available on this topic. But in a scoping review, there's no assessment of methodologic quality. So you're looking only at inclusion. And so this asks the question, this particular review asks the question, what conceptual and or theoretical frameworks are currently available in the literature for nurse practitioner education? So we weren't really interested in what the quality of the frameworks or the conceptual theoretical frameworks were, but we just wanted to know what was out there and what was available, and can we adapt those frameworks to the educational practices that are available for nurse practitioners around the globe. And I should take one step back and mention that when you do a Joanna Briggs Institute review, you do need to address the global implications of your findings. So we were looking at this for nurse practitioner education in Ontario, but we are making a commentary about nurse practitioner education globally, as there are a number of countries that are struggling with frameworks for nurse practitioner education. So this has been a really interesting review to do, because it doesn't follow the usual, or has not followed our usual approach for systematic review using the assessment tools that are available from the Joanna Briggs Institute, which is totally fine. So to give you an example of what our search strategy looked like, I should go back one and tell you that Amanda Ross-White is absolutely the most talented library scientist I've ever worked with, and she does the vast majority of our methodologic searching when she's on our projects, and she actually goes back and looks at the sensitivity and the specificity of our searches, so that when we collect all of our data and all of our articles, we can be very sure that we're on the right track, and we are very fortunate to have her. So here's an exemplar of one of the searches we did in Medline, and old Medline. So you can see it's quite complicated. It drills down to the different types, and she explodes and contracts different mesh terms. If searching is an issue for you, I would recommend going on YouTube. There's quite a few really good YouTube videos on searching Medline databases and CINAHL database and all of the library databases, or talk to your friendly neighborhood library scientists, because they are absolutely invaluable. For this scoping review, we had to design our own data extraction instrument, because at the time we didn't have a scoping review methodologic guidance from the Joanna Briggs Institute yet. So we used Walker and Avant, and I actually was in touch with them and got their permission to adapt their theoretical analysis procedure. So we use this as our approach to bring everything together. And here's our flow diagram. So one of the most important things that you should see in every systematic review that you pull off, you should see a decision flow diagram that tells you how many articles came from the different databases, what happened to them, a sensitivity search. In this example that Amanda did for us, found 2 additional articles that weren't captured in our original search, which is really good. So that's a very small percentage of the total articles that we were able to find. We found, so you can see we've also made transparent the hand searching. So we were looking in the reference lists, we were looking in gray literature, we found a number of other documents. So the total number of documents we retrieved were 2,545. And as I'm sure of you know, when you look at these different databases, there's going to be duplicates. So that's sort of a happy day when you can subtract 653 from your search. That's 653 titles and abstracts you don't need to look at, which is fantastic. So you can see how it goes down through the flow diagram. So you have to make, when you're doing a systematic review, you have to be very, very transparent about what you've included and what you haven't included. So which ones weren't on topic and they didn't meet your inclusion criteria, and how did you get there? How many full text articles did you review? And what did you end up with? In our case, we ended up with 23 articles, and we removed the 11 provincial documents we got in our gray literature search. So we're still working on that one, so stay tuned. We will, that review was actually funded by the Coupon PHCNP evaluation grant, and hopefully we'll have that one published soon. The other one we're working on right now is a systematic review of frailty indices. The principal investigator on this study is Julie Zalen, who is now anesthesiologist working in Ottawa, with myself and Dr. Mike McMullen, one of my anesthesia colleagues, and once again Amanda Ross-White, the busiest library scientist around. And we're looking at frailty indices and to see what their predictive value is for postoperative morbidity and mortality. And if you're not familiar with frailty indices, they're pretty hot right now. They are the different ways that you can assess the frailty of individuals, and in this case, prior to surgery. And we're very interested in elderly patients in this review. So that one's ongoing now. Julie's furiously extracting data, so hopefully we'll have that one finished as well. So these studies do take quite a lot of time, I should note, particularly when you have a large number of articles to review and you don't necessarily have a research assistant. So that certainly is one of the things that might slow you down. It's an all hands on deck kind of a project. So the next one, I promised you I was going to talk to you a little bit about using systematic review methodology to do something pragmatic. So I've recently been working with the International Council of Nurses in Geneva, Switzerland, and one of the things that they asked me to do right off the top, first day there, will you please look at RN prescribing? And so, having done a very quick scope of the literature, I discovered that what I needed to do was really map the available evidence to provide an overview for the ICN of the barriers, facilitators, and requirements for RN prescribing across the global region. So if you can imagine, there are prescribers at the RN level across Europe, in Africa, in North America, in South America, in multiple different countries. And so there is evidence, there is literature out there to look at. So in this, what we call a rapid review, for which there is a methodology, I looked at the review in 3 phases. So I was interested in, first, what are the definitions of RN prescribing that are used in research and in regulatory literature? So it's important right off the top to make sure that you understand what the definitions are. So is it RN prescribing as in Ontario RNEC, or nurse practitioner prescribing, or are they talking about prescribing at the baccalaureate level? Or are they talking about RN prescribing at the master's level, but for clinical nurse specialists, which does occur in some countries? Phase 2 of this review, rapid review, we're looking at the barriers and facilitators and educational requirements, as well as practice support required for RN prescribing in all of these different jurisdictions across the globe. And phase 3, in the global environment, what is the regulatory support for RN prescribing? So this was a really interesting little use of my review knowledge. And I think really for me was really a practical use. And once I said it before, once you see something, you can't unsee it, right? So once you've done a systematic review, you're not really comfortable just sort of doing a broad swath through the literature and deciding based on 5 or 6 articles that you pull off. So I did create a methodologic approach and followed it to the letter in this rapid review that I did for them. So here's what I came up with. So I searched Sinol, Medline, Epistemonikos, as I mentioned to you before, the Cochrane Library and the Joanna Briggs Library, using some terms that Amanda suggested for me, and also ones that I knew were going to get me a good swath through the literature in a very short period of time. Because there were some systematic reviews available, I actually limited my review to systematic review and document type. So this is more sort of scoping than systematic because I did not assess methodologic quality. So just to give you an idea of what we ended up with. So ended up with 39 systematic reviews. I screened 34 of them because I couldn't find 5 in the time that I had. I had 29 full text articles. I excluded 17. One of them, unfortunately, was not in English language. 15 were off topic, so not related, and one was a duplicate publication. So that does happen sometimes in systematic review, where you see just a slight difference in research question in the systematic review of the same group of articles is then published in a second publication. So it's less prevalent now, but if your systematic review goes back a period of time, say 10, 15 years, you may find duplicate publications. So that's something to be aware of. So in this quick review, I included 12 systematic reviews. And just a quick overview of the findings. In phase 1, developing a definition of what nursing prescribing actually looks like and all the different types of nursing prescribing was so important to be able to, in the subsequent phases to my quick review. I needed to look at the different countries represented in the literature, so I was able to make a comprehensive list of that and include a comprehensive list of barriers and facilitators from the literature, as well the education, nursing experience, and what it was like to initiate prescribing practice. There was a discussion, implications for policy, practice, and research, and recommendations. So I was able to use the systematic review and the review methodology to do something very quick and very practical that I feel quite confident about because I followed the methodology. And I think if you have an opportunity to take a systematic review course from either Joanna Briggs or from the Cochrane collaboration or elsewhere, I think everybody would find it useful because you can do practical things such as this, as an example, that are going to help you in your research, are going to help you in your practice. And at Queen's with our graduate students, systematic review is an expectation of our doctoral students when they are preparing their theses. So we are taking it's a very serious look at the literature, which I think really helps you, stands you very well and gives you a good grasp of the evidence. So that was a quick review of systematic review. Julia and the staff at CASN and Mina have asked me to stop at 40 minutes and see if you have any questions about any of these things. This, by the way, is the Heidelberg Castle, which I was at a few weeks ago. If you have an opportunity to go to Heidelberg, I highly recommend it. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I understand that you need to put your questions in the question and answer or the question forum in Adobe Connect.
So while people are typing, Rosemary, it's Mina. I thank you for your very thorough explanation of systematic reviews. I did the course at Joanna Briggs, as I had mentioned to you earlier this week. I wonder if you could maybe talk about the time, how to manage time to do a systematic review. Because of multiple demands, what do you suggest? Like, how do you think we should go about doing it?
It's tough. You've asked a $64,000 question. There are products out there, Mina, that do help you to organize your systematic review outside of using the software for Joanna Briggs or Cochrane. My best advice is just to stick at it. So, and use technology as often as you can. We actually use when we're doing double. So, I should mention, I probably didn't mention it before. When you're doing a proper systematic review, you have to do independent assessment of whether or not you're going to include an article, and independent assessment for methodologic quality, and independent assessment or independent data extraction for two. And if there's a discrepancy, you use a third person. So it really minimizes your bias. And we use technology and keep on top of each other. So we use a keep, toss, and need more information approach when we're looking at text and abstract, or title and abstract. And so we'll goad each other. So I don't know if that's answers your question, but if I'm doing a review with Kim Sears, my colleague, she'll say, well, I've done my 100, where are you? So we'd like to use a little bit of peer pressure, but staying on top of it is so important, and using proper folders and technology to help you, because it's really easy to get discombobulated when you have 2,500 articles to look at. So I would book time out every week for working on the review if you've got one on the burner, because as you can see, it's so easy to get us sort of out of the game. It's like writing your thesis, right?
It is, and we've, with a colleague of mine, we've had one on the back burner now for 2 years, and I think our protocol has expired now from Joanna Briggs, because I think the protocol is time limited, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, you do have to, unless it's a weird one like ours, you do have to update it. So it's not all is not lost. You just have to update your literature search to make sure nobody snuck in there and scooped it from you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just wondering, does anyone online have any questions for Rosemary?
Well, it looks like Jordana wants me to talk a little bit more about scoping reviews. So, scoping reviews I find are fascinating, and you've probably heard of scope creep, right? So with scoping reviews, you can definitely have scope creep. So you have to you're sort of setting your net really wide. We actually did a presentation a few years ago about scoping for really complex topics even before you start a systematic review. So doing a methodologic approach to scoping the literature first. So scoping really looks at what's out there. And the question is different. So your question is sort of what is available on this topic, or um, what are the numbers of, or who looks at this topic, or what are the interventions available for treating neonatal abstinence syndrome, for example. So you go out and you look at the literature and you're doing an accounting um, and an illustration in some respects of what's actually available. So the scoping review, the biggest difference between scoping and regular systematic reviews of effectiveness or meaningfulness is that you're not doing a necessarily a assessment of methodologic quality. So what you end up after a scoping review is a look at, say, like lists of things and um, potentially implications for further research. Say, okay, well, here's a big gap in what interventions are available, and this might be somewhere a primary study is required, or a review on another intervention is required. So scoping reviews help you to answer those questions as well. The Joanna Briggs Institute has very good guidance on scoping reviews that was written by a number of folks, including my colleague, Dr. Christina Godfrey, who is an expert in scoping reviews. And we talk about it a lot in our systematic review training that we teach at the Queen's Collaboration for Healthcare Quality. So if you're really interested in doing a systematic review, I would encourage you to come and take the course. It's really good. I really enjoy the scoping reviews. It's a bit like being Sherlock Holmes, you're searching through the literature and saying, there's something on this topic, or here's this interesting piece of gray literature that talks about this. It's like a game. So I hope that sounds like that answers your question. Any other questions? It can be kind of a dry topic, but one of the things that I really like about doing systematic reviews is that you have an opportunity to work so closely with your colleagues and really to kind of hash things out together in a way that I haven't experienced just doing primary work. I mean, not to the same extent. So it looks like Catherine has something coming.
Typing. Yep.
Oh, good. I mean, really, it's interesting that when you've done a systematic review, you just can't stop at a small number thing. There must be something else out there. I feel like something is missing, and because you have access to somebody like Amanda, who is, as I mentioned, invaluable. I can feel when I've done the systematic review, I can feel that I've really been very rigorous in collecting the evidence.
One thing I've found helpful, Rosemary, for us is we have used our librarian, and she has done most of our searches for us, and I found it was very, very helpful. And because she understands how to do the mesh terms and then the key terms, and so I don't know how many people have the opportunity to work with the librarians.
Well, it's so important, and I think that it's really, really hard to get the search right unless you've got some help. But there are lots of opportunities on the net to teach you how to do it. Lisa has said, how do you
Okay.
reconcile the time it takes to do with a, okay. So yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? It does take a long time, but you know, if you're trying to get doing something practical and you don't want to do a full-blown systematic review, it is good to be able to use systematic review methodology to do something rapid. So if you do need to get timely information to form a policy decision that's requires a nimble response, still using a methodologic approach to get there is important. But you don't want your policy decisions to be made on um, you know, not a rigorous process. And so it really is you know, is it you kind of you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So if you don't mind the metaphor, you know, if you don't do the time to do a systematic review properly, then you might be introducing bias into the recommendations or the policy information that you're going to be using. So that's really the problem, Lisa, I think that we all face. Fortunately, you know, whether you're going to do the systematic review yourself, or there might be one out there, if you have an opportunity to assess the quality of a systematic review, then you can use the work that somebody else is doing, because lots of people are doing systematic reviews right now. And to use them as a source of your evidence is very, very important. And I hope this talk has helped to sort of sensitize all of you to what the standards are for systematic reviews that exist that you might be using to inform your practice or your policy decisions. Because if you jump into epistemonikos and you narrow your search to just systematic reviews, you'd be shocked at the number that are out there on different topics. Absolutely shocked. So, you know, maybe it's not a question of having to do the review yourself, but maybe just doing a critical appraisal of an existing review to get the answers that you want. Is that fair, I hope? As a clinician slash academic um, slash mother slash sailor, it's really easy for me to get um, to sort of get off the train of doing a systematic review. So I totally can appreciate that it's tough to um, and it takes an awful lot of time and it's an awful lot of coordination, and once again using technology and uh, using using peer support, it really does help you get it done. Well, Anne, I think you should come take the course then.
When is the course? You had mentioned that there's a course in May, I think, Rosemary?
April. We're actually running one at yeah, QCHCQ is running a systematic the comprehensive systematic review training April 23rd to 27th. And we usually run it twice a year. And I imagine I'm not sure about when Cochrane runs theirs. They're a little bit different than ours. I would encourage you, if you're interested in the difference between or the complementary aspects of Cochrane and Joanna Briggs, and there's the Campbell collaboration and others. Uh, just do a simple Google search. You can see who's doing systematic review and what training is available. Everybody does things just a little bit different.